Good afternoon, Congressman Smith, Congressman McGovern, and all of the distinguished members of the Human Rights Commission, all of the participants in this room. Thank you for inviting me today to speak on the topic of Pakistan and its ongoing repression and human rights abuses. It's very important for the US Congress to understand the nature of the Pakistani state in order to be able to adopt clear policy in order to deal with it accordingly. Pakistan is no doubt an authoritarian military dictatorship regime. The military controls every aspect of the Pakistani state, from political appointments to economic policies to diplomacy to resources, leaving no room for genuine civilian governance. That's not to say that the civilians are innocent, and I will get into that in a later part. The recent general election of 2024 serves as a testament to this truth, as it was only a show designed to install a government favored by military. The evidence for electoral manipulation is undeniable. We witnessed internet blackout, media censorship, opposition groups were suppressed, candidates favored by the people were disqualified to clear the path for military's favorite choices. These actions confirmed that the election was a sham, and in fact, there is no democracy there. Another critical issue is, for decades, Pakistan's ethnic minorities have been treated as second-class citizens. Their rich cultures, languages, and identities are suppressed, and their grievances are met with a state-sponsored repression. The arrest and continued detention of Dr. Mehrang Baluch, a prominent Baluch female leader, is just one example. Dr. Baluch committed no crime. Her only offense is fulfilling her civic duty, protesting against violence and discrimination her people endures, and courageously seeking justice for the countless disappeared and murdered Baluch citizens. Her detention, carried out in blatant disregard of all international norms, highlights the military dictator's fear of a strong, capable women leaders, especially those emerging from ethnic minority communities. Religious minorities in Pakistan. Pakistan's religious minorities live in constant state of fear. Non-Muslims, including Christians, Hindus, Sikhs, along with Shiites, Sufis, and other sects of Islam, have never been truly safe. They face discrimination and violence. The legal system often becomes a tool of their oppression, failing to provide the protection and justice they deserve. Blasphemy laws are weaponized against them. Mob violence is frequently condoned, and their places of worship are routinely attacked. The plight of women in Pakistan. Pakistani women face restrictions and discrimination across all aspects of life. While the regime may parade women in political roles, their presence is largely symbolic. These women mostly come from rich and powerful families with ties to the military and doesn't represent the grassroots. Even these women rarely exercise any real power. If male political leaders are mere puppets of the military, one can only imagine the utter lack of agency afforded to the women. Beyond the political sphere, women in Pakistan confront violence, including honor killings, domestic abuse, sexual assault. Forced marriages remain a tragedy for many, and the cases of rapes often go unaddressed, with victims facing a justice system that frequently fails them. Furthermore, women disproportionately suffer from unemployment and lack of economic opportunity, perpetuating a cycle of dependency. The regime's failure to genuinely address these issues speaks volume about its disregard for half of its population. But the most critical issue of all, Pakistan's duplicity and double game when it comes to its relationship with the United States. Pakistan has consistently played a double game with the United States, portraying itself as an ally while undermining American interests. They sided with dictators in Russia, China, and Iran as they created, armed, trained, and managed Taliban terrorists. Their objective was clear: to kill Americans and NATO forces in Afghanistan and force them out of the region that they got. They used the charismatic figure of Imran Khan, then Prime Minister, to mislead President Trump after announcement of his South Asia strategy. Khan rushed to Washington presenting a message of peace from the Taliban, a message that was in fact a carefully crafted deception by his Russian counterparts. He convinced President Trump to pursue a peace deal with the Taliban, which only empowered these terrorists, as they were never sincere. The peace process inevitably failed, leading to the US withdrawal and the subsequent establishment of a gender apartheid regime in Afghanistan by the Taliban terrorists, whose Russian recognition just a few days ago proves that the Taliban's status as a Russian proxy. And the civilians played a key role in this. As I mentioned, Prime Minister Imran Khan at the time acted as a spokesperson for the Taliban, as he was going around the world indicating that this group is an indigenous group serving the interests of the people of Afghanistan or serving Islamic identity. That was not the case. And it was later proved, however, the dangers, the terrorism nature, as well as the hatred that they have towards the West, towards women, and all of the ideals that we have. And civilians played a role in that. So the Pakistani state cannot buy the trust of the United States by imprisoning only few individuals like Imran Khan or the head of the ISI, Faiz Hamid. They need to go after the broader network of all of the Russian, Chinese, and Iranian networks within their establishment, whether it's political and military. Now, the Pakistani leaders, both military and civilians, complain about the Taliban threats as they seek US assistance to combat them. But even now, according to them, the Taliban is good for Afghanistan, but bad for Pakistan. This is a blatant display of their duplicity. Pakistan's ongoing arrest, detention, and forceful deportation of Afghan refugees is shameful and inhumane. These Afghans had escaped the very Taliban tyranny that Pakistani leaders helped bring to power, and now the Pakistani regime is forcibly sending them back. What kind of human beings force refugees to return to a terrorist regime that denies girls access to education, systematically subjugates an entire nation into darkness, and commits unspeakable atrocities? If it wasn't enough to force Afghanistan into this darkness, now those seeking refuge are being sent back. This is inhuman, utterly unjustifiable, and demands the strongest possible condemnation from all civilized nations of the world. A call to action. The United States must hold the Pakistani leaders, both civilians and military leaders, accountable and demand a clear declaration of where they truly stand moving forward. The choice before Pakistani leadership is simple: a stand with democracies or a stand with authoritarians and a state sponsor of terror. That is Russia, China, Iran, the axis of evil, and the Russian terrorist puppet regime of the Taliban in Afghanistan. If Pakistan cannot entangle itself from the axis of evil, then the United States must treat it as such, a state sponsor of terror. The metrics for their alignment with democracies are clear and verifiable. Cut off all ties with the Taliban in Afghanistan. Stop mistreating and forcing Afghans to return, and instead provide legal protection, pathways for them to remain safely in Pakistan until Afghanistan is truly free. Support the anti-Taliban Afghans so they can free their country from the Russian occupation and its terrorist puppet regime of Taliban. A free Afghanistan will naturally lead to the voluntary return of most Afghan refugees. Purge army and political structure from all of the Russian and Chinese agents who are closely working with the terrorists and undermining democratic principles. Open up the political space for all ethnic and religious minorities. Hold a genuinely free and fair election that will naturally cement their ties with the United States and democracies of the world. The time for Pakistan's duplicity is over. Both civilians and military leaders, the United States must demand a clear choice and hold them accountable for the path that they choose. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Amini. Appreciate your testimony and your leadership. I'd like to now recognize Ben Linden for such time as he would like to use.
Thank you, Chairman Smith, Chairman McGovern, Representatives Bonamiki and Subramanian, and all Commission staff. Thank you for this important hearing. Today, I will discuss legal and physical attacks against religious and ethnic minorities in Pakistan. These human rights violations contribute to the erosion of rule of law for all Pakistanis, creating an environment hostile to all dissent. The crackdown on freedom of association and expression experienced by the PTI, as described by my colleagues on this panel, should be understood in the context of this larger assault on human rights. First, I'll speak about the attacks on the Baluch activists. The Baluch Yakjati Committee, the BYC, has mobilized thousands to peacefully demand justice, accountability, and an end to enforced disappearances. Yet BYC members who attempt to peacefully protest are arrested, while internet and mobile services are routinely suspended and media coverage of the protests is severely restricted. Dr. Marang Baluch, chief organizer of the BYC, has been under arbitrary detention alongside 5 other activists since March 22nd. Meanwhile, the Baluchistan Assembly recently amended its provisional anti-terrorism law to allow for detention up to 90 days without charges. The activists could have their sentences extended further under this law. Last week, the BYC announced that its detained activists had been relocated and that their families were being denied access. Dr. Marang and the other activists have not been given due process and should be freed. The past 6 months has also seen a marked increase in enforced disappearances and extrajudicial killings targeting Baluch activists. Just 2 weeks ago, BYC member Zishan Zahir was abducted. 8 hours later, his bullet-ridden body was dumped. These cases are part of a systemic attack on the rights of the Baluch community. Turning now to religious minorities. For decades, Pakistan's penal code has barred members of the Ahmadi community from calling themselves Muslims or practicing their faith in public. Harassment and restrictions against Ahmadis spiked around Eid holiday last month, when individuals were forced to sign affidavits to refrain from Eid prayers and rituals. 3 Ahmadis have been killed since mid-April in apparent targeted attacks. Instead of protecting this community, local authorities have arrested Ahmadis, including children, outside of their places of worship around Friday prayers. Even the Lahore High Court Bar Association has lobbied for restrictions on this community. These institutions should be protecting the rights of religious minorities, not attacking those rights. Meanwhile, Pakistan's vaguely worded blasphemy laws are increasingly being weaponized by majoritarian religious groups, while the accused have few means to defend themselves. In 2024 alone, 344 new cases were opened following blasphemy allegations. This caused widespread harassment and intimidation against religious minorities, although most cases were against the recognized Muslim community itself. 10 of those accused of blasphemy last year were extrajudicially killed. Finally, turning to the forced deportations of Afghan nationals. In September of 2023, the Pakistani government announced a phased deportation plan targeting Afghan refugees and asylum seekers. Since then, more than 1 million Afghan nationals have been forcibly returned to Afghanistan. People facing forced return to Afghanistan, including journalists, human rights defenders, women protesters, artists, and former government officials, are at imminent risk of persecution and repression by the Taliban. And I would add that Afghan women refugees' voices would be particularly valuable to this commission, and perhaps they could be invited back for another hearing to update this commission in the near future. Those still in Pakistan, those Afghan refugees still in Pakistan, live in constant fear of harassment, arbitrary detention, and deportation, with no due process or lawyers to represent them. Among them are those in the pipeline for U.S. P1, P2, and special immigrant visas, or SIVs, some of whom fought alongside U.S. forces for 20 years. The harms against Afghans in Pakistan are compounding. Deportation orders and their looming deadlines have made Afghan refugees vulnerable to extortion by officials who demand bribes, and parents are afraid to send their children to school in case they're picked up for deportation. Some of those receiving support from NGOs have had their aid cut due to the freeze in U.S. foreign aid, making them even more vulnerable. Due to the ongoing conditions in Afghanistan and the risks facing those who are returned, any deportation or forced return of Afghans to Afghanistan violates the principle of non-refoulement. U.S. Congress and the Trump administration should do the following. First, call for an end to the harassment, arbitrary detention, and extrajudicial killings of Baluch human rights defenders exercising their rights to freedom of expression and peaceful assembly. Second, call on the Pakistani authorities to release and drop charges against all Ahmadis detained solely for exercising their human rights, in particular their rights to worship freely, and take concrete steps to protect those rights. Third, call on the Pakistani government to repeal all blasphemy laws and laws that discriminate against the Ahmadi community. Fourth, reverse the ban on Afghan nationals entering the United States and allow the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program and the State Department's Coordinator for Afghan Relocation Efforts, or CARE office, to continue to process P1 and P2 visas and SIVs, fulfilling a bipartisan commitment from Congress to support Afghan allies. Needless to say, the dismantlement of the CARE office should be reversed. Finally, or penultimately, extend temporary protected status for Afghans already in the United States, and finally call on the Pakistani government to stop the arbitrary arrests, detentions, and harassment of Afghan nationals and reverse the decision to forcefully deport Afghan nationals. Before wrapping, I want to just add one note, which is to say, to briefly acknowledge that the work of defending human rights in Pakistan and everywhere requires expertise at all levels of government. Amnesty International is gravely concerned by the reckless reorganization of the State Department, the drastic cuts to the human rights and humanitarian assistance, and as of last week, the reduction in force affecting critical human rights positions held by civil servants in the State Department. Congress should act expeditiously, using all oversight appropriations, and other powers to prevent permanent damage to the State Department's long-developed institutional expertise and relationships in support of human rights and refugee protection around the world. Thank you for your commitment to human rights, and I look forward to today's conversation.
Thank you, Mr. Linden, for your testimony. Just to begin the questioning, let me point out that you, Mr. Bukhari, in a Reuters piece yesterday, underscored the concerns that you have, I think, with the paramilitary force that's being created, and especially as it relates to the August 5th remembrance of the second anniversary of the arrest of Prime Minister Khan. And I'm wondering if you might want to expand upon that. I'll give a few questions so we can expedite for the other members as well. But to me, that sounds like very ominous. I mean, the military is bad enough. Now they're going to, impress into service some additional people, thugs carrying guns. That's very, very disconcerting. If anyone would like to react to the August 2023 Intercept report that leaked Pakistani diplomatic cable, which then referred to then U.S. Ambassador Donald Lu of having encouraged Pakistani's military leaders to remove Khan. Is that true? Is it untrue? I don't know. I've read the Intercept article, and I'm just, it'd be nice to, on the record, to know with total transparency if that were true. With regards to the religious freedom and the sanctioning pursuant to the country of particular concern designation, one of the biggest disappointments that I've had with the IRFA law, and I held all the hearings on it back in 1997 and 1998, and then it was Frank Wolf's law, and then did a Frank Wolf International Religious Freedom Act in 2017 that expanded it significantly. And one of the biggest disappointments, no matter who's in the White House or at the State Department, while the designations often are accurate, there's no sanctions. And prescribed in the statute are at least 18 very significant sanctions that can be meted out to a country. Matter of fact, one of the only sanctions on travel was imposed on Modi for what he had done vis-a-vis a number of Muslim people that were killed, the Prime Minister of India. But that's about it. I mean, there's almost nothing. So we are going to be calling on the IRFA office to really look at imposing, especially all the terrible things that they're doing to various people of various faiths, to say, that's it. We've got 18 sanctions here, and we're going to impose them on you. So I do hope that will, and you might want to speak to that in response. On the YouTube issue, which is outrageous, in 2006, I had a hearing that lasted 7 hours on how Google, Microsoft, Cisco, and Yahoo were aiding and abetting the Chinese Communist Party, but Google in particular, by completely censoring all things related to Tiananmen Square massacre and everything else. But they are also opening up their vaults to Chinese Communist Party police, and Yahoo was especially egregious in this activity. And they were going to go after all the human rights activists, the democracy activists. And when I asked all four of them under oath, including Google, why are you doing this? Well, we got a request from police. I said, the police and the PRC are thugs. They kill people, they torture people. And now we see Google responding to one magistrate's demand to take down YouTube videos. And I think that's outrageous, and we need to raise that to them as well. They enabled the Chinese Communist Party, still do, but they're also, unfortunately now playing a very malign role here in taking down those videos. I would finally point out that, in terms of foreign aid, the first Trump administration cut it off. The Biden administration pretty much continued that, I'm happy to say. But there were IMET and FMS sales, particularly for F-15s, F-16s, I should say. And they claimed that was a sale rather than, hey, if you're aiding and abetting their Air Force when you have such a dictatorial regime running the place, shame on us if we enable that. So if you want to speak to that, I would hope there'd be a complete clampdown on all of this. That has not happened. So we need to push that as well. So if you could, and again, if you all would like to finally make any further comment on HR 2311, bipartisan bill headed up so ably by Joe Wilson and Mr. Panetta, that to me seems a very good step, but we need additional sanctions. That's why the CPC country of particular concern, sanctions, they're sitting there right there to met out because of what they're doing on the religious persecution side.